Hare Krishna, my dear devotees, all glories to Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Today we're hearing from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 7, Chapter 7, text number 39, which says, one's riches, beautiful wife, and female friends, one's sons and daughters, one's residence, one's domestic animals like cows, elephants, and horses, one's treasury, economic development, and sense gratification. Indeed, even the lifetime in which one can enjoy all these material opulences are certainly temporary and flickering. Since the opportunity of human life is temporary, what benefit can these material opulences give to a sensible man who has understood himself to be eternal? Very nice verse. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. This verse describes how the advocates of economic development are frustrated by the laws of nature. As the previous verse asks, Kim Vishayo Padanai. What is the actual benefit of so-called economic development? The history of the world has factually proved that attempts to increase economic development for bodily comfort through the advancement of material civilization have done nothing to remedy the uh, inevitable, inevitability of birth, death, old age, and disease. Everyone has knowledge of huge empires throughout the history of the world. The Roman Empire, the Mughal Empire, the British Empire, and so on. But all the societies engaged in such economic development, Sarve Rita Kama, have been frustrated by the laws of nature through periodic wars, pestilence, famine, and so on. Thus, all their attempts have been flickering and temporary. In this verse, therefore, it is said, Kurvanti, Martyasya, Kia Priyam Kala. One may be very proud of possessing a vast empire, but such empires are impermanent after 100 or 200 years. Everything is finished. All such positions of economic development, although created with great endeavor and hardship, are vanquished very soon. Therefore, they have been described as kata. An intelligent man should conclude that material economic development is not at all pleasing. The entire world is described in Bhagavad Gita as dukkhalayam, asasvatam, miserable and temporary. Second. Economic development may be pleasing for some time, but it cannot endure. Thus, many big businessmen are now very morose because they are being harassed by various plundering governments. In conclusion, why should one waste his time for so-called economic development, which is neither permanent nor pleasing to the soul? On the other hand, our relationship with Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is eternal. Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema. The pure souls are eternally in love with Krishna. And this permanent love, either as a servant, a friend, a parent, or a conjugal lover, is not at all difficult to revive, especially in this age. The concession is that simply by chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, Hare Nama, Hare Nama, Hare Nameva Kevalam, one revives his original relationship with God and thus becomes so happy that he does not want anything material. As enunciated by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Najanam Najanam Nasundarim Kavitam Vajagadishakamani. A very advanced devotee in Krishna consciousness does not want riches, followers, or possessions. Raya Kalatram Vasava Sutta Dayo Griha Mahi Kunjara Kosha Bhutaya. The satisfaction of possessing material opulences, although perhaps of a different standard, is available even in the lives of dogs and hogs, who cannot revive their eternal relationship with Krishna. In human life, however, our eternal dormant relationship with Krishna is possible to revive. Therefore, Prahlad Maharaja has described this life as arthaham, arthadam. Consequently, instead of wasting our time for economic development, which cannot give us any happiness, if we simply try to revive our eternal relationship with Krishna, we will properly utilize our lives. Okay, very good advice. Text 40. It is learned from Vedic literature that by performing great sacrifice, one may elevate himself to the heavenly planets. However, although life on the heavenly planets is hundreds and thousands of times more comfortable than life on Earth, the heavenly planets are not pure, in other words, nirmalam, or free from the taint of material existence. The heavenly planets are also temporary, and therefore they are not the goal of life. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, however, has never been seen or heard to possess iniquity. Consequently, for your own benefit and self realization, you must worship the Lord with great devotion, as described in the revealed scriptures. So the word iniquity means being intoxicated by lust, anger, and greed. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, Shine Punye Martyalokam Vishanti. Even if one is promoted to the higher planetary systems by performing great sacrifices, which are accompanied by the sinful act of sacrificing animals, The standard of happiness is Swarga Loka, is also not free from disturbances. There is a similar struggle for existence even for the king of heaven, Indra. Thus, there is no practical benefit in promoting oneself to the heavenly planets. Indeed, from the heavenly planets, one must return to this earth after one has exhausted the results of his pious activities. In the Vedas, it is said, Tad yate ta karma jito loka kshat yate evam eva murtya eva murtra punya punya chito loka kshat yate. I'm sorry. Loka kshat yata. As the material positions we acquire here by hard work are vanquished in due course of time, one's residence in the heavenly planets is also eventually vanquished. According to one's activities of piety in different degrees, one obtains different standards of life, but none of them are permanent, and therefore they are all impure. Consequently, one should not endeavor to be promoted to the higher planetary systems, only to return to this earth or descend still lower to the hellish planets. To stop this cycle going up and coming down, one must take to Krishna consciousness. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu therefore said, Ramanda Ramite Kona Bhagavan Jiva Guru Krishna Prasade Haya Bhakti Lata Bija. Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya 19.151. The living entity is rotating in the cycle of birth and death, going sometimes to the higher planets and sometimes to the lower planets. But that is not the solution to the problem of life. But if the grace of Krishna, but if by the grace of Krishna, one is fortunate enough to meet a guru, a representative of Krishna, one gets the clue to returning home back to Godhead, having achieved self realization. This is what is actually desirable. Vajatatma labdaye. One must take to Krishna consciousness for self realization. Text 41. A materialistic person, thinking himself very advanced in intelligence, continually acts for economic development. But again and again, as enunciated in the Vedas, he is frustrated by material activity, either in this life or the next. Indeed, the results one obtains are inevitably the opposite of those one desires. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. No one has ever achieved the results he desired from material activities. On the contrary, everyone has been frustrated again and again. Therefore, one must not waste his time in such material activities for sensual pleasure, either in this life or in the next. So many nationalists, economists, and other ambitious persons have tried for happiness, individually or collectively. But history proves that they have all been frustrated. In recent history, we have seen many political leaders work hard for individual and collective economic development, but they have all failed. This is the law of nature, as clearly explained in the next verse. Text 42. Sukhaya dukha mokshaya sankalpa iha karmina sada noti haya dukham anihaya sukha vrita. In this material world, every materialist desires to achieve happiness and diminish his distress, and therefore he acts accordingly. Actually, however, one is happy as long as one does not endeavor for happiness. As soon as one begins his activities for happiness, his conditions of distress begin. Oh boy, what a verse. Let me read that again. Actually, however, one is happy as long as one does not endeavor for happiness. As soon as one begins his activities for happiness, his conditions of distress begin. That's an amazing statement. Let me read that again. In this material world, every materialist desires to achieve happiness and diminish his distress, and therefore he acts accordingly. Actually, however, one is happy as long as one does not endeavor for happiness. Whoa, what a statement. One is happy as long as one does not endeavor for happiness. As soon as one begins his activities for happiness, his conditions of distress begin. Wow, this is an amazing verse. Every conditioned soul, purport, every conditioned soul is bound by the laws of material nature, as described in Bhagavad Gita. Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvasa. Everyone has achieved a certain type of body given by material nature. According to the instructions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Ishvara Sarvabhutanam Hridese Rajunatistati Ramayam Sarvabhutani Yajarudrani Mayaya. The Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart, O Arjuna, and is directing the wanderings of all living entities, who are seated as on a machine made of the material energy. Bhagavad Gita 1861. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Super Soul, is present in everyone's heart. And as the living entity desires, the Lord gives him facilities with which to work according to his ambitions and different grades of bodies. The body is just like an instrument by which the living entity moves according to false desires for happiness, and thus suffers the pangs of birth, death, old age, and disease in different standards of life. Everyone begins his activities with some plan and ambition, but actually, from the beginning of one's plan to the end, one does not derive any happiness. On the contrary, as soon as one begins acting according to his plan, his life of distress immediately begins. Therefore, one should not be ambitious to dissipate the unhappy conditions of life. Therefore, one cannot do anything about them. Ahankara, we do hatmam, kartaham iti manyate. Although one is acting according to false ambitions, he thinks he can improve his material conditions by his activities. The Vedas enjoin that one should not try to increase happiness or decrease distress, for this is futile. Tasyaiva hito prayateta koda. One should work for self-realization, not for economic development, which is impossible to improve. Without endeavoring, one can get the amount of happiness and distress for which he is destined, and one cannot change this. Therefore, it is better to use one's time for advancement in the spiritual life of Krishna consciousness. One should not waste his valuable time as a human being. It is better to utilize this life for developing Krishna consciousness without ambition for so-called happiness. Wow. Now, this is a very, very profound verse and purport. We should really hold this close to our heart and mind to understand what is our real position in life. And so let me just read a few more important things in this purport. It says, the Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart, O Arjuna, and is directing the wanderings of all living entities, who are seated as in a machine made of the material energy. That's a verse, Bhagavad Gita 1861. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Supersoul, is present in everyone's hearts. And as the living entity desires, the Lord gives him facilities with which to work according to his ambitions in different grades of bodies. The body is just like an instrument by which the living entity moves according to false desires for happiness and thus suffers the pangs of the pangs of birth, death, old age, and disease. See, there's a rule of that says as soon as we have sense gratification, it is always followed by misery. It's an actual rule. We've read that previously. And here again, it's saying that. Therefore, it says, the body is just like an instrument by which the living entity moves according to false desires for happiness, and thus suffers the pangs of birth, death, old age, and disease in different standards of life. Everyone begins his activities with some plan and ambition, but actually, from the beginning of one's plan to the end, one does not derive any happiness. On the contrary, as soon as one begins acting according to his plan, his life of distress immediately begins. Because there's a rule. There's a fundamental rule. Whenever one attempts to have sense gratification, it is always followed by misery. Yes.
Yeah, Maharaj, you have shared this before. It's in the 5.22 Bhagavad Gita.
Oh, yeah, 5.22.
In Bhagavad Gita.
Bhagavad Gita.
So I can read the line in
yeah.
the purport. There is one line. The more one is addicted to material pleasures, the more he is entrapped by material miseries.
Here it is. So what's the verse again?
5.22 Bhagavad Gita.
5.22. Okay. Yeah. The more one is trying to achieve sense gratification, the more one is miserable. You know? Okay, so however, the Vedas enjoin that one should not try to increase happiness or decrease distress, for this is futile. Tasyaiva heto prayate kovida. One should work for self-realization, not for economic development, which is impossible to improve. Yeah, according to one's karma, everything is already settled. We have had previous lives, and in those previous lives, we have committed different acts of sense gratification, and therefore we have a karmic, let's say, uh, influence in our life, and then we can't change it. The only way we can make something less miserable is to become Krishna conscious and not endeavor for sense gratification and wealth and prestige and so forth. To become rather more humble and use our energy and intelligence to make spiritual advancement, not material advancement. That's why it says, Tasyaiva heto prayate kovida. One should work for self realization, not for economic development, which is impossible to improve. Now, nobody will accept that statement. They think, no, I'm going to work to become rich and famous and happy, have sense gratification, have nice cars, and houses, and all kinds of gadgets. Uh, all of that is pie in the sky. Yeah, you'll have some fake happiness for some short period of time, but it will all be destroyed by the passage of time. Therefore, it says, Tasyaiva hito prayate kovida. One should work for self realization, not for economic development, which is impossible to improve. Yeah, because everybody has karma, and one cannot escape uh, the different activities that one did in the past. There's going to be karma. However, one can stop committing karmic activities by engaging in devotional service. Although one is acting according to false ambitions, he thinks he can improve his material conditions by his activities. The Vedas enjoin that one should not try to increase the happiness or decrease the stress, for this is futile. One should work for self realization, not for economic development, which is impossible to improve. Without endeavor, one can get the amount of happiness and distress for which he is destined, and one cannot change this. Therefore, it is better to use one's time for advancement in the spiritual life of Krishna consciousness. One should not waste his valuable life as a human being. It is better to utilize his life for developing Krishna consciousness without ambitions for so-called happiness. Now, this is almost impossible for normal materialistic people to understand. No, they think, oh no, I'm the exception. Oh, there's no question of being an exception. Okay, text 43.
One
Yeah.
question, Maharaj. Maharaj, the line comes here from last 5-6 lines during the end of the purport. It starts with without endeavor, one can get the amount of happiness and distress.
It's karma.
But I need more clarity, Maharaj, in the word without endeavor. But and so people has to act, right? They have to do some endeavor to get it, or they don't need to endeavor at all.
No, we will all have what is called karma from previous life. You can't really change it unless you become a devotee. Then the karma is put on hold so you can engage in devotional service. As soon as you stop engaging in devotional service, it all comes back again. So we should be satisfied with whatever Krishna is giving us and use our time and energy to make advancement in Krishna consciousness. Chanting, dancing, feasting, and learning regularly every day more and more about Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, and not waste our time trying to become a millionaire or trying to improve our sense gratification. Yeah, there'll be some period of sense gratification, but it's going to come to an end. And you're going to be, let's say, bankrupted by the laws of material nature. And we see that. There are people who are very rich, and because of different situations, they lose all their money. And then they go crazy and then commit suicide. It happens a lot. And they do also, they kill their own family members, thinking that, well, since they cannot enjoy life anymore, let me kill my family also, who all died together. Those are nonsense concepts. But it happens a lot. It happens a lot. That's why it says the Vedas enjoin that one should not try to increase happiness or decrease distress, for this is futile. And so why does he say it's futile? Well, because we all have karma from previous lives. And there's not, we don't change that karma by living a mundane life of eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. However, if we take up Krishna consciousness, our karma can be held back to give us a chance to make spiritual advancement. In other words, when we decide to, instead of seeking sense gratification, one tries to be Krishna conscious, always engaging in devotional service, our karma is put on temporary stoppage. And if we continue the rest of our life not engaging in sense gratification, but engaging in devotional service, gradually that karma is destroyed. But gradually doesn't happen overnight. And so therefore we should be uh, and as it says here, um, the body is just like an instrument by which the living entity moves according to false desires for happiness and thus suffers the pangs of birth, death, old age, and disease. You notice this, it's talking about everyone is trying to be happy, but you cannot be happy by increasing sense gratification. That is something that people can't understand. However, you can be happy by endeavoring to make spiritual advancement, not endeavoring to increase your sense gratification.
Hare Krishna.
Like, for example, somebody has a car and they see somebody else driving around in a new car and they think, oh, I don't want this car anymore. I want to get a new car. But what's the difference? The old car, as long as it's not, uh, let's say, not able to drive, as long as you can drive it, what's wrong with driving it? No, but there are some people they change the car every year, right? Or every couple of years they change the car, even though the car is okay, it's in good condition. So this what you would call effort to always have more sense gratification is what is putting people in trouble. We should be satisfied with whatever Krishna is giving us easily, and that way have time to be engaged in devotional service. But if we're always trying to endeavor to increase our sense gratification, bigger houses, bigger cars, bigger stool, we're not going to actually make any spiritual advancement. He'll make some material advancement, but not spiritual advancement. So it's much better to advance spiritually, which means lesser sense gratification than endeavoring for more sense gratification. That's why it says here one should not be ambitious to dissipate the unhappy conditions of life, for one cannot do anything about them. Ahankara vidu vimudadva kartaham iti manyate. Although one is acting according to false ambitions, he thinks he can improve his material conditions by his activities. The Vedas enjoin that one should not try to increase happiness or distress, happiness or distress, or decrease distress, for this is futile. Tasyaiva heto prayate kovita. One should work for self-realization, not for economic development, which is impossible to improve. Without endeavor, one can get the amounts of happiness and distress for which he is destined, and one cannot change this. Therefore, it is better to use one's time for advancement in the spiritual life of Krishna consciousness. One should not waste his valuable life as a human being. It is better to utilize his life for developing Krishna consciousness without ambitions for so called happiness. Okay, so uh, most people don't understand this. they try to work very hard day and night to increase their wealth, their prestige, their sense gratification, and so forth. And it's all temporary. Let's say you get a big, beautiful new car. How long is it going to last? Not that long. Eventually it becomes an old car, and then it ends up in the junkyard. So it's better to be satisfied with whatever Krishna gives you easily, rather than to try and force your endeavor to get bigger cars, bigger this, bigger that, bigger stool. And so it's better to be modest and be satisfied with what comes not naturally, rather than to force your endeavors to get richer and happier and so-called uh, rich or a powerful person or a conqueror. The more we want to conquer, the less we will be happy, and we will be a failure, a complete failure in the end. Look at all the big guys, like you have in history, that have been able to conquer countries and people, but it all ends in failure. It never ends in success. Such people have some temporary success, but eventually it is all defeated. It all goes to dust. There's so many great empires that have come and gone in past history. So you can make a list of all these great empires that eventually disappeared. However, if we just are satisfied with whatever Krishna gives us without too much uh, extra, let's say, endeavors, and use that energy that we have for self-realization, then we'll be happy, and we will be able to make spiritual advancement. Okay, so a living entity, text 43. A living entity is, yes.
Smara, there is one question
Oh, okay.
online. Yes, Mataji.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. The US Declaration of Independence says life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So, pursuit of happiness devoid of God is futile. Is that what this purport is saying?
Yes. We have to ask our question. A question. What is real happiness? Real happiness is just is sustained peace and uh, spiritual advancement. That is real happiness. So you don't have to be rich for that type of happiness. You just accept whatever Krishna gives you and be satisfied with that and continue making spiritual advancement. You can make spiritual advancement whether you're rich or poor. You don't have to, let's say, think that, oh, well, I can't be happy unless I'm rich. No, yes, you can be happy if you're not rich. You just be satisfied with what Krishna has given you and make spiritual advancement on a daily basis, chanting, dancing, feasting, and so forth. But some people are not satisfied. They want more sense gratification, and they have to work very hard to maintain it. And when they start losing it, they go crazy and sometimes commit suicide because they have lost their wealth. That means they are spiritually bankrupt. Why should you commit suicide? Because you lost all your money? No, you're still alive. You can still make a living by working honestly. Why should you commit suicide? But no, there are many people that don't commit suicide because they lost all their money. Right? They think, well, without all that money, I'm a failure. Therefore, I should kill myself. So when a very, very rich man loses all his money, oftentimes they commit suicide. That is a very, very stupid thing to do because uh, one should never commit suicide because one will become a ghost if they do that. They should just be satisfied. Okay, I lost this, but I'm still able to live, not on this very high level of sense gratification, but that was all false anyway. I should just live humbly with whatever Krishna gives me and be satisfied with that and have time to make spiritual advancement. Okay, so the body is just like an instrument by which the living entity moves according to false desires for happiness and thus suffers the pangs of birth, death, old age, and disease in different standards of life. Everyone begins his activities with some plan and ambition, but actually, from the beginning of one's plan to end, and one does not, and from one's plan to the end, one does not derive any happiness. On the contrary, as soon as one begins acting according to his plan, his life of distress immediately begins. Therefore, one should not be ambitious to dissipate the unhappy conditions of life, for one cannot do anything about them. Ahankara vibudatma kartaham iti manyate. Although one is acting according to false ambitions, he thinks he can improve his material conditions by his activities. See, in other words, instead of being satisfied by his spiritual activities, one engages in material activities, thinking that he can make advancement. Well, maybe for some short period of time, one will make material advancement, but all that is going to be uh, time sensitive. Everything will end up dust. Dust thou art, and dust thou shalt become. So everything material is going to begin, have some period of success, then uh, become uh, gradually destroyed over the period of time. So therefore, rather than chase a false uh, concept, one should try to make spiritual advancement by chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra and being satisfied with whatever Krishna gives you easily without over endeavoring yourself. So there are some people that work day and night to make more money. But what's the use of that money if you have a heart attack and die? It's not going to help you. Rather, you should live a peaceful life and cultivate Krishna consciousness and be satisfied with whatever Krishna gives you without extraneous uh, endeavor. I mean, the endeavor to be rich. You don't have to endeavor to be rich to live. You can live even if you're poor, but you can make spiritual advancement even if you're poor. But you cannot make spiritual advancement if you're only thinking about sense gratification. Okay, so The body is just like an instrument by which the living entity moves according to false desires for happiness, and thus suffers the pangs of birth, death, old age, and disease in different standards of life. Everyone begins his activities with some plan and ambition, but actually, from the beginning of one's plan to the end, one does not derive any happiness. On the contrary, as soon as one begins acting according to his plan, his life of distress immediately begins. Therefore, one should not be ambitious to dissipate the unhappy conditions of life, for one cannot do anything about them. Ahankara vibudatma kartaham iti manyate. Although one is acting according to false ambitions, he thinks he can improve his material conditions by his activities. The Vedas enjoin that one should not try to increase happiness or decrease distress, for this is futile. Tasyaiva hetu prayateta kobida. One should work for self realization, not for economic development, which is impossible to improve. Without endeavor, one can get the amount of happiness and distress for which he is destined, and one cannot change this. Therefore, it is better to use one's time for advancement in the spiritual life of Krishna consciousness. One should not waste his valuable life as a human being. It is better to utilize this life for developing Krishna consciousness without ambition for so called happiness. Now, most people cannot understand this, unfortunately. And they go through different types of miseries due to this adamant effort to increase wealth and sense gratification. All that does is increase suffering and misery. If one is satisfied with whatever Krishna gives them, they have time to make spiritual advancement because they're not trying to always get more and more sense gratification, eating more, sleeping more, and engaging in more sex and so forth. The beginning of having a spiritual life is giving up sex desire. Without giving up sex desire, you'll never make any spiritual advancement. Yeah, you can still have children, but you do not have uh, uh, uncontrolled sex life. Sex life is only for procreation. It's not meant for so-called pleasure. Some people think, well, my only pleasure is having sex. No. You can have real pleasure is to have a healthy life of Krishna consciousness and avoiding unnecessary sex life, which will only dissipate your energy, and in the end, you end up with nothing. Now, some people will never accept this. They can say, no, 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 I have to have sex. If I don't have sex, I'm not going to be happy. And along with that, I like to drink liquor and I like to have nice cars and I like to have bigger houses and this and that. Right? It'll last for some time, but it'll be a failure in the end. Why make that type of endeavor when you're destined to fail? Better have a spiritual life that's very, let's say, regulated in order to make spiritual advancement. And that way, there's no ups and downs. It's steady advancement in spiritual life. That should be our goal. To have a simple, happy experience, always engaging in devotional service. Then Krishna protects you. But if we're always trying to have more and more sense gratification, first of all, Krishna is not going to protect you. That means you are completely at the mercy of karma. And why put yourself in such a position? You don't know what your karma is until it happens. However, your karma can be put on hold if you engage in devotional service so that you can make spiritual advancement. Krishna will put your karma on hold so you can make spiritual advancement. But if you only are interested in sense gratification, you don't know what your karma is. And it might look in the beginning like, oh, you're very, very successful, but it can all end in misery and complete frustration. So, better to not endeavor for sense gratification, but endeavor to use your energy for spiritual advancement. That's our takeaway for today.
Haribol. Thank you, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna. Therefore, Prabhupada says, one should not be ambitious to dissipate the unhappy conditions of life, for one cannot do anything about them. Ahankara vimudatma kartaham iti manyate. Although one is acting according to false ambition, he thinks he can improve his material conditions by his activity. The Vedas enjoin that one should not try to increase happiness or decrease distress, for this is futile. One should work for self-realization. There you are. Not for economic development, which is impossible to improve. Without endeavor, one can get the amount of happiness and distress for which he is destined, and one cannot change this. Therefore, it is better to use one's time for advancement in the spiritual life of Krishna consciousness. One should not waste his valuable life as a human being. It is better to utilize this life for developing Krishna consciousness without ambitions for so called happiness. Yeah, you're not going to be happy by having a new car every year. You might think you're happy, but it's not really going to make you happy in the long run. In the long run, one is happy because of being Krishna conscious and developing more and more love and devotion for Krishna, in which there is reciprocal experience. The more you serve Krishna, the more Krishna will give you knowledge and protection so that your life will be peaceful and be able to go back to Godhead easily. Okay, thank you very much, my dear devotees. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. This is our takeaway for today. Be satisfied with whatever your karma is, but use your life for Krishna consciousness. Then you will be protected by the mercy of Krishna. You have to have that faith. Okay, all glories to Prabhupada. Are there any questions or comments?
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. I have a question, Maharaj. A lot of people are getting laid off these days by the companies and they're not able to find jobs. So with the high prices and high cost of living, even with Krishna conscious, how would they be able to deal with this? Oh, thanks.
Okay, that's a very good question. In one sense, that's good because now you'll have extra time to make spiritual advancement. So once you get laid off, yeah, you have to look for another job if it's possible. But it should make you realize that the real advancement in life is to be Krishna conscious, not to be rich and have a lot of material uh, success. Because that material success, as you can see, is temporary. You can lose your job and lose sometimes your house, lose your car, lose everything. However, if we endeavor to be Krishna conscious, Krishna says, Konteya pratijanihi name bhakta pranashyati. Declare it boldly, Arjuna, that my devotee will never perish. So, Krishna is guaranteeing your success if you become Krishna conscious. Even if you lose your job, you simply endeavor honestly and never give up being Krishna conscious. And you'll see in some mysterious way, you will always be able to maintain yourself, even in the most difficult situations, because Krishna will be protecting you. The protection of Krishna is worth more than all the money in the world. Why? Because Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We have to have that faith that somehow, in some mysterious way, Krishna will always protect us. So therefore, even if you lose your job, you should not be forlorn. You should not think I'm a failure. You should double your and triple your engagement in devotional service and be satisfied by whatever Krishna gives you. Some people are spiritually bankrupt. So when they lose their money, they commit suicide. But a devotee is not disturbed by the ups and downs of material life, understanding that these are temporary things. So he simply continues straight forward, making spiritual advancement. He will not be destroyed by losing his wealth or having to change his house or having to change his car, this or that. He will continue because of being humble and steady in devotional service. That's what we should worry about. Always being engaged in devotional service. Then Krishna guarantees that he will protect his devotee. Konteya pratijanihi name bhakta pranashyati. Declared boldly, Arjuna, that my devotee will never perish. We have to meditate on that guarantee that Krishna is giving. So we should never give up regulated devotional service. Never. We should always be involved in regulated devotional service. And that will result in Krishna protecting you in all situations. So it's better to live a simple life of Krishna consciousness uh, than having a very let's say stressful life of continual sense gratification, because the sense gratification is limited according to our karma. Some people will have more sense gratification, some people will have less sense gratification. But for both, eventually the sense gratification comes to an end. So therefore, what does not come to an end is regulated devotional service to Krishna. So that's what we should do. Not have the not put ourselves in the dangerous situation of endeavoring for sense gratification all the time. We should put ourselves in a position of steady devotional service. That way we'll have a peaceful life and make spiritual advancement. You don't really advance by making more money, but you do advance by having a peaceful life of Krishna consciousness every day. That's why we have classes every day, at least twice a day, where we're hearing about Krishna consciousness and engaging in devotional service. That is the real life of a devotee. Now, you might not be rich. Well, who cares? You will always be protected by Krishna's mercy. That's worth more than all the money in the world. There was once a group of people that were going on a pilgrimage. So there were some people who were walking in the pilgrimage, and there were other people who were very rich, and they were sitting on elephants and eating very opulent food. And the poor people were eating only like bread and water and being very, very, let's say, uh, not opulent on the pilgrimage. Well, the ones who had a lot of servants, they were eating opulent food and so forth. Uh, some of them became sick and died, and the uh, you know uh, and the let's say effort to reach the Holy Land. They never got there because they were living an opulent life, even on the uh, movement from one place to another. And some people never even made it because they were still trying to live an opulent life during their uh, you know endeavor to reach the Holy Land. And there were others who were poor, who were walking. They didn't have horses, they didn't have elephants. They were walking, but they reached the Holy Land because of their modest and, let's say, humble lifestyle. Whereas the real rich people, they were trying to continue to have an exorbitant life, eating and having all the special foods uh, and having soft beds in their journey. So it's better to be humble and dedicated to following Krishna consciousness than to be rich and always being anxiety and fearful of people trying to steal your money. People who are very rich, they have to hire guards, and they're always worried about the thieves and dacoits and so called that might try and kill them and steal their money or uh, take away their children and then and demand a very high amount of money to get the child back. And, it's better to be poor but happy and peaceful. So the thieves, they don't try and steal money from poor people because uh, they're always going to try and steal money from rich people. Therefore, rich people often have to have guards and always be in anxiety about someone trying to steal what they have. And just imagine how terrible that is. You have to have guards because they know that you have a lot of money and they're going to try in one way or another to steal what you have, and even to the point of killing. Just like there was this one thief, he tried to take a ring off the finger of a rich lady, and he was not able to get it off, so he got a knife and cut it off. So, why have such uh, very rich things, jewelries, and all these things? It only uh, is a way of putting yourself in danger. If someone is walking around with jewelry that's worth hundreds and thousands and sometimes millions of dollars, it's very dangerous. You need guards to protect you because there are, as soon as there are these dacoits that know that the jewelry you have is worth millions of dollars, they're going to take the risk to steal your wealth. So it's better to be humble and, let's say, not have all that jewelry, not have all that riches, uh, but have a full life of Krishna consciousness. Okay, so let's endeavor to have a full life of Krishna consciousness and not be worried about protecting our wealth, because we are only destined to have so much success in material life. But there is no end to the joy of a spiritual life, which is humble but steady and always increasing in love and devotion for Krishna. That is our takeaway for today. Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. I would like to make a comment, if it's okay. There's a famous singer in India. His name is Zubin Garg, and 13 days ago, he had gone to Singapore with his bandmates, and some of his bandmates poisoned him and took his money and put them in their respective banks. But they got caught after they came back. Obviously, the police got. So it's an example of what you were just talking about right now. So
Yeah,
it just, yeah.
it's dangerous to have guards because the guards can kill you and take all your money. You think that you're being protected by the guards, but the guards could be very, let's say, uh, dangerous, especially in situations where you are completely dependent on them and they can kill you and take all your money. That's why having a lot of money is actually dangerous. You need to have guards, but sometimes the guards will kill you and take your money. So, what to do? It's better to be not very rich. That way, you don't have to have guards. You don't have to have special, uh, you know, bulletproof cars, and always be in anxiety because you know that there are many thieves that are going to try and steal what you have. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, my dear devotees. Be modest and live in a humble way to make spiritual advancement. That is real riches. Spiritual advancement, not monetary advancement. And whatever money you do have, you should use it in the service of Krishna consciousness. That way you're protected by the mercy of Krishna. But if you simply hoard money, that is actually sinful, and you will get karma, bad karma, for hoarding money. Okay, thank you very much. Please chant Hare Krishna and be happy. And if you're able to make $1 million every day, you should spend that money in one day to make spiritual advancement and helping others, rather than increasing all your money and ending up with millions of dollars, but you will be always in anxiety about how to protect all your money. It's better to use your money in the service of Krishna. Then you don't have to hire guards. You don't have to be worried about thieves, and you will be very, let's say, peaceful in mind because you're using your money for Krishna consciousness. That's the best way to use your money. Hare Krishna, all glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai.